And this is the fun part for me. So I've known Anna and Michaela for quite a while and always love being able to be in your space. We've got some strong leaders here. So Anna Moss is an organization, strategy, and performance consultant for the Office of Financial Management here in Washington State. And so in this role, she partners with leaders and employees to support division strategic planning, process improvement, and org change management efforts. Anna supports agency-wide initiatives, including strategic planning and OFM's pro-equity, anti-racism planning, also known as PAIR here in Washington State. So Anna holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and is a certified pro-site change management and also in Lean Six Sigma. So very glad to have you and your experience here with us today. And so also Michaela Dolman, she's the Chief Human Resources Officer for the state of Washington and has more than 16 years of HR and public service experience here in state government and generally. As a first-generation biracial American, she began her HR career working as a recruiter with a real passion for trying to build systems and processes that helped folks access, oh, I lost my little thing. Where'd it go? Okay. Let me start that over. She began her HR career working as a recruiter with a passion for trying to build systems and processes that helped ensure that every person had a fair and equal chance to employment. And she's carried that passion for building equitable systems and workplace cultures where everyone can belong throughout her career. Michaela is a parent to 4 wonderful children and enjoys running, biking, traveling, and trying new foods in her spare time. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to you, Anna, to kick off this excellent session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samantha, for the warm introduction. And hi, everyone, and good afternoon. And thank you so much for being here today as we talk about embedding equity, belonging, and lean principles into your strategic planning process. Michaela and I are both so excited to be here today to talk about strategic planning. And we know it's after lunch, so we'll do our best to keep it exciting for all of you. And next slide, please.
I don't think we're sharing slides at this point. It doesn't appear they're up. Yeah.
Yep, you're right. So if we can share those, please, that'd be great.
Is Results Washington running the slide deck on this one? Is that what the?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think we were under the impression you all were. So give me a quick second, real quick.
No worries. Thanks, everyone, for your patience.
So this might take me a minute or two. I wonder if we want to launch the poll potentially.
Yep, that works.
If that works, I think we have a question.
That's great.
All right.
Yeah, so Michaela and I have a couple of poll questions that we're hoping all of you can complete, where we're really hoping to use the information gathered from these poll questions to help us tailor our presentation content today, just so we're providing the most value-added information to all of you possible. So in a moment, you should see the first poll pop up on the screen, and we're really just hoping to understand your experience with strategic planning. So if you've ever participated in a strategic planning process. Our second poll question is, what is your level of knowledge about equity and belonging? And then we have a third poll question, just trying to understand your perspective about strategic planning and whether or not you think it's an important and value-added exercise. So we'll give everybody just a couple of moments to respond to each of these questions, and then we will take a look at the results. All right, it looks like the poll has closed. Thank you so much. So it looks like we have about 74% of today's audience has participated in strategic planning, and about 26% have not. So that's great for us to know as we talk about some strategic planning specific concepts today. And then we have the vast majority of today's attendees at 60% answering an intermediate level of knowledge about equity and belonging, and then 25% for beginner and 15% for advanced. And then for our last question, we have a little over half of today's attendees who believe strategic planning is important and adds value, and then some agree and neutral responses, and it looks like we have a few strongly disagree responses. All right, thank you so much for sharing that information with us, and we'll use that information throughout our presentation today. And I think we can go ahead and probably go to slide 3, please. Thank you. So our agenda today is split into 3 sections. So we'll start with a review of learning objectives, followed by an overview of the strategic planning process that Michaela and I used with State Human Resources to develop their 2023 through 2025 strategic plan. And then we'll close by sharing a few resources. And just to echo what Samantha shared during the introduction, we really want this to be interactive and encourage you to use the Q&A feature to ask questions throughout our presentation. And we'll do our best to monitor the Q&A with the assistance of Results Washington and respond to questions as they arise as much as possible. And there will also be time at the end of our presentation for questions as well. Next slide, please. So we have a couple of learning objectives that we're really striving for in today's presentation. And I think just overall, we really are hoping to discuss the positive impact that embedding equity, belonging, and lean principles has on the strategic planning process and why it's important. And then we'll really focus in on sharing some scalable and tactical strategies and resources that you can use and tailor and modify as needed to integrate equity, belonging, and lean principles into your strategic planning processes. And then we'll also talk about how we designed our process to work for a hybrid, albeit mostly virtual work environment to ensure that everyone has access to participate. And now I will turn it over to Michaela to share a quote that really embodies, I think, how we approached strategic planning.
Thanks, Anna. If you don't mind going to the next slide, we really tried to have this quote be with us the whole time during the strategic planning process. And hopefully you'll see it interwoven into all that we share in the future. But I'm sure many of you are familiar with this because it's used quite often. But I think what was really resonating with us is like before we started the strategic planning process, we had to really kind of stop and question, how are we doing the work? How are we designed? And if we're really being honest with ourselves, a lot of our work in state government or in any government work is kind of designed to go fast. And it's funny because like we always talk about government bureaucracy, right? Of like, oh, well, we want to it's not seen as moving fast, but it's really about kind of that concept of I can get it done faster if I just do it by myself. Some recent examples that were coming up, I know during the pandemic, working in HR, we talked with a lot of people around, maybe we should stop and hire and train more people up, and heard the phrase a lot around, it would take too long for me to train new people up. It'd be easier if I just do it myself. And that works for a period of time until, you get burnt out or the workload becomes so high that then you have to stop and train folks up. And so we were really kind of approaching it from this mentality of let's stop and be purposeful from the beginning. Yeah, we could probably do strategic planning in a way where it's just a small group of leaders and we could get it done in 2 weeks. But is that really going to carry through and have the end result that we want? So we really tried to be purposeful around how do we do this together so that the strategic planning doesn't just become an object that we're done with and it sits on this now virtual shelf, because we don't work in the office that much anymore, so our bookshelves are pretty bare. but trying to figure out, what does going far look like when it comes to strategic planning, and how do we design our process so that it fits, so that we can go far together. We can jump to the next slide after that. We also wanted to be mindful. One of the things when we talk about embedding equity and belonging is recognizing that we want to use accessible language. I know many people, looking at the number right now, getting a little nervous seeing 563. I'm assuming many of you are state employees, but we know that the Lean Conference is inclusive, that there are people from other governments, from private sector that are here. I also know that, when I first started in state government, I didn't understand all of how government works. So we wanted to start off with some context of what is state HR? Who are we? So when we talk about, what our purpose was, what we're trying to accomplish with our strategic planning, that you have some insight into kind of who we serve and what our role is. And so when you think about state government, there are approximately in the executive branch, approximately 70,000 state employees. We also serve some higher education, like colleges that are state funded, but we don't do most of the direct services. You and your organizations, you're probably used to working with your HR person who is in your agency. What we do in state HR, we're about 80 people, so we're not very big if you think about serving all of state government, but we do that centralized policy and HR work that we support the other HR organizations. So I like to joke, we're the back office to the back office when we think about administrative work. But we do the collective bargaining and labor relations. We're about 80% unionized in the state, so we do that. We administer all 32 contracts. We have a rules and appeals section, so we're responsible for the WACs and RCWs, and then the Personal Resources Board, where non-represented folks can file appeals. We administer the classification and compensation plan. So if you look at on the OFM website, if you look at, like what does a human resource consultant 3, what is that job specification and what pay range is it? We administer that. We're also the system and product owners of kind of those centralized HR systems. So your HRMS and that type of thing. And we do that through an economies of scale. So it's much cheaper for us to purchase it and administer it out for the rest of the state than for each state to buy their own system. We also have a workforce data and people analytics team that does dashboards and helps us take that people data and say, what story do we want to tell so that we can advance kind of the workplace culture as a whole. And then we administer HR policies that are then kind of set a standard for state government. And each agency probably has your own workforce policies. So we do it in a sense of what are the ways that we want to standardize for best practices. So that's kind of a high level overview of what we do in state HR.
All right, so I want to refer back to the poll questions from the start of today's presentation for a moment. So we had asked how many of you have participated in a strategic planning process before, and also whether you believe strategic planning is important and adds value. And in terms of if you've participated, we had, I think 76% of folks or close to that who have, and then we had over half who indicated strategic planning is important and adds value. And we wanted to level set our conversation today about strategic planning by sharing the why, and specifically why strategic planning is important and how it can add value when it's done well. And an important first step in the strategic planning process is to pause and consider the outcome that we want to achieve. And in general terms, the outcome that we want to achieve and the purpose of strategic planning and ultimately why it's important are the same. We really want a co-created functional roadmap to our organization's future that describes our vision for the future, our mission, our values, our priorities or focus areas, measures to track our progress, and action plans to describe where we're going and how we're going to get there. And strategic planning is also important because it provides us with the opportunity to be proactive when we know where we want to go. That gives us opportunities to really prepare to achieve that outcome. It also increases our operational efficiency and helps us align our work with our organization's values. And I want to go back to something that Michaela mentioned in terms of kind of that experience of, a strategic plan sitting on a shelf. And it's also really important to avoid that outcome, that we have sponsorship and buy-in from leaders at the onset of a strategic planning process, because they're really instrumental partners in helping us create a value proposition for why strategic planning is important in an organization, but also ensuring that the plan truly does get implemented and therefore is value added. And I think now we are going to talk about our vision for strategic planning in state HR, which Michaela is going to cover.
Thanks, Anna. And I saw about 74% of folks had participated in strategic planning at some point. I know I've participated in a couple of different agencies. And what's interesting is I know the process of how to do it. And sometimes strategic planning just becomes that process where it's like, we put out a survey, we get feedback, a couple of people go into a room, you put it out on paper, the wordsmithers come in and they fix it and then they put it out there. But like Anna said, we didn't want it to sit on a shelf. And so I'm so appreciative when I had asked Anna for support to say, hey, can you help us with our strategic planning? We know we want to do this, but I was like, I don't know how to lead it. I just know that that it's important and that we want to do it for our team. One of the first things she asked me as the employees or state HR employees to know, feel, and do afterwards. And it really caused me to think, to say, oh yeah, I mean, our process is our process, but will that lead to our employees understanding the importance of helping co-create the division of the strategic plan? No, it wouldn't, the way I was thinking about designing it in the first place. And, would a process where you just kind of collect some feedback and then go back in a room and create it, have employees feeling like their work matters and that they're connected and heard and valued and informed, and just that they felt like it was their strategic plan as well. And I realized, no, the way I wanted to design it, it wouldn't. And what we also talked about, or what these questions really prompted me to realize is, oh, we can't just we have a tendency to be rushed in everything, because strategic planning is oftentimes an afterthought of, we have this other work to do. Oh yeah, and we got to do strategic planning. And so it was that realization of, oh, and we also need to be really proactive about engaging folks and providing feedback and hearing feedback. So it really stopping to think about what you want employees who are participating in strategic planning to know, feel, and do. And these are my answers, right? This was specific for us in state HR, but asking those questions before you get started really helped us kind of design a more purposeful process that we're about to tell you about in the next slides. All right, sorry. I was looking at the questions. I got one person who said that they couldn't hear me. So if someone else can't, let me know. So when we also designed it, and oftentimes we talk about different concepts. So we talk about lean, we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and they are very kind of specialized areas. And I want to make sure that, as you're hearing me, I'm acknowledging that I am giving a broad overview of this. But oftentimes in our society, we tend to see the differences, right? We tend to see what we don't have in common or what we're in conflict with. And oftentimes we don't see where we align. And so what Anna and I talked about is, I see a lot of similarities between lean and equity and belonging principles. And so when we designed our strategic planning process, we wanted to do it with both a lean and an equity lens. And so we had kind of 7 principles that we really wanted to infuse into our strategic planning process. The first one was, we really wanted to make sure that we were sharing power. And what that means in a kind of a strategic planning mindset is that oftentimes strategic planning is designed, like I had mentioned, just by leaders and for leaders. But if we want everyone to be able to see themselves in the work, then we needed to have everyone help design what it should look like. We heard from teams that before we started, because we sought feedback around, what are you expecting from strategic planning, or what fears do you have? We heard from team members that they wanted to make sure that they had opportunities to participate and that it wasn't limited to just one time. People were really purposeful about saying, hey, I might not be able to make a meeting. My time, I don't have that flexibility in my schedule. So we were really purposeful about saying, we're going to have 3 sessions every session that we have. So if we're going to do a listening session on values, we're going to hold 3 different options so that you can always find a time that will work for you. We also wanted to make sure that we had different mediums in which people could share, recognizing that not everybody feels comfortable speaking up in front of a large group. Some people are processors and they want to share things afterwards rather than in the moment. So we really wanted to make sure that we designed it with that shared power in mind. And from the lean principle, it's that who defines value. We realized if we want employees to walk away feeling like they're a part of it, then they need to define the value of what the process looks like. The second one was really having that continuous improvement mindset. The feedback itself that we got from folks, we were able to show, we're continuously improving the process, we're changing it. But we knew that strategic planning was new to most folks because we pulled them as well. And a lot of people in state HR had not participated in strategic planning, nor were they familiar with it. So we really wanted to make sure that we were understanding, we were designing the process in a way that they could share feedback saying, hey, this didn't work for me, or this didn't make sense, and that we were updating it. We shared out a lot of information ahead of time based off of that feedback, but we were constantly kind of improving the process along the way. So we shared out, here's what we think we have in mind, but each time we kind of tweaked it and improved it based off of the feedback that we got. The third one is addressing questions and concerns kind of in the moment rather than waiting for just at the time that, like, oh, we'll wait till the end. And this is kind of in alignment with that continuous improvement. We weren't going to say, wait till the end and tell us what your questions and concerns are. And it was really about emphasizing function over form, meaning that we kept saying, hey, the purpose of all of this is to make sure by the end that we have a roadmap that everyone can see their work in, that people understand where we're heading, that we have shared and kind of mutually agreed upon values and goals. And if there is a barrier in our process that is keeping us from getting there, we want to hear that. And we will make changes to that because we don't want to, like, if it works for us, but it doesn't work for anyone else, then it's not going to work, right? Because we're not going to get to that end goal if it's not working for everyone. And we really tried to emphasize that. And then when people did share feedback, we would anonymously acknowledge that in front of everyone and say, hey, we got great feedback. We're making a change off of that because of that feedback, because again, the end goal is more important than any part of the process so that we could make it safe for other people to continue to share feedback in the future. The fourth one on this slide was, we wanted to make sure we know that approximately 15 to 20% of our workforce is neurodiverse. And that can be a lot of different things, but really it's about the idea that if we want to emphasize a workplace where everybody feels like they can belong, we don't want to other people. And so if people process information in different ways, if people are saying like, hey, I need time to process ahead of time, or I might not feel comfortable speaking up in public until I have time to practice it myself, we wanted to make sure that we tried to design the process in the most accessible way possible for all the diverse ways in which people interact with our work. And so what that looked like was that we made the commitment after hearing specific feedback from staff and kind of ideas on what it could look like, that we would provide the meeting materials at least 3 business days in advance of any meeting so that people could look over it ahead of time. And that, if people shared that they had feedback afterwards, like it didn't close down. We weren't saying like, oh, the session's over, we're not hearing feedback anymore. And that was just one example, but it was really kind of trying to recognize that if we design this, we want to design this for everybody to feel like they have the opportunity to fully participate. If we move to the next slide, we'll cover the last 3 principles. And this one is kind of related to that same topic, topic number 4. But we also wanted people to feel confident that we heard them accurately and give them the chance to edit or update their feedback. I don't know if you're like me, but there's been times where I've shared feedback and people are like, I got it. And then they post it and I'm like, that's not at all what I said. Like, you didn't hear me at all. So we wanted to make sure that, like, one, but hopefully that we could earn trust by showing that we were hearing people, but also that they had a chance to say, nope, that wasn't it. Or, hey, I had a chance to process a little bit more and I have a different way to describe it now. So we wanted to make sure that we would provide the notes out so that people could review them, and that we would also give them the opportunity to change it if they wanted to. Number 6, I can say that I am not the most organized person in the world. And when I don't plan, things sneak up on me. Like, I'm just like, oh, shoot. And then you become rushed and then you don't do things very well, right? Then you show up and you're not sending the meeting minutes out, or the agenda out in advance, or you're not sending the notes out in advance. This is also why I don't do Anna's work, and why Anna is such an amazing partner in our work, because she is like a really good planner, and she is very purposeful and organized about the things. But this was really trying to, like, put it out there as a commitment, because we knew that if we weren't purposeful, if we didn't plan and execute things out with kind of that precision to say, here's when we're going to do this, things would sneak up on us. Because again, a lot of times strategic planning is that other thing that we do on the side in addition to our regular work. At that same time, there were a couple of times that we did decide to push dates out. Those dates did not stay stagnant, because, you know, whether it was holidays or a work deadline of a big part of the team where people couldn't make it, we went with our principles again, where we said, we want this to be accessible. We want people to have the opportunity to participate. So this process did take a little bit longer, because we did push some things out based off feedback that we heard. And then the 7th one, or the last one, is, you know, going back to that concept that we know that not everybody, you know, thinks or processes information the same way, or has kind of the same understanding of what strategic planning was. We really tried to design the process in a way that had clear communication, that we tried to remove jargon, because a lot of times, you know, strategic planning has these words where you're like, what does that even mean? And we took the time to provide context for each of the steps. So when we were saying, hey, we're discussing values, here's what values are. When we're discussing goals, here's what goals are. And we would send out links to say, you know, what's the difference between a goal and an outcome measure, and how do they align together, or how do they roll up in the process, so that people felt like, you know, they could provide the right feedback. What we also found is, you know, like a good lesson learned from us was that we probably should have taken more time in helping people understand what strategic planning was, because there was still some confusion even with all of that. And so, you know, lesson learned, we would have done that differently the next time. But I think we also, in order to show, what we saw was people gave feedback, really great feedback, about kind of the wrong thing, but a great feedback for another part of the process. And so we also tried to pull feedback that was really great, but maybe not relevant for the session that we were having, and put it up in a parking lot and use it for other places, so that we could show people, hey, it's still here, it's still valuable, it's just showing up maybe in this section instead of the one that you participated in.
All right, so this roadmap is really a high-level visual depiction of our strategic plan process. So this is the order in which we developed components of the 2023 through 2025 State Human Resources Strategic Plan. So we started with the vision statement, as it's really a best practice to establish your vision statement first. Many people refer to a vision statement as kind of our true north, or our North Star, but really kind of considering and thinking about, you know, what outcomes do we want to achieve with our actions? And if we were to achieve all of our goals, what would our future state look like? So really ensuring that it's aspirational in nature. Once we had our vision statement in place, we moved on to defining a mission statement. And, you know, I think another way that we refer to a mission statement is really your purpose. So why does your organization exist? What are important things that your organization does? And how do you add value for your customers? And we really wanted to ensure that there was clear alignment between our vision and mission statements. And so kind of a template to check the alignment and connection is if you have a piece of paper and you write the phrase, our mission is, and then your mission statement, so that we can realize a vision of, and then your vision statement. That's a really easy way to verify that there's connection between those two statements. And if not, it's an opportunity to revisit them. If there is connection, that's great. And just thinking about how can we continue to elevate and amplify that. Our third step in the process was defining our team values. So our core organizational beliefs and really our commitments to each other, our partners, and our customers. And we really are using values to be the guiding principles for all of our decisions and actions. And when we think about vision, mission, and values, that's really the foundation of strategic planning. And so once those have been established, we then move into establishing the fourth item here, which is strategic priorities. And those are our long-term, high-level goals that we want to work on for the duration of the strategic plan cycle, in our case, 2 years, and that we really want to work on achieving by the end of that cycle. And then the final step was success measures. So really having measurable objectives that demonstrate that we're making progress towards achieving our strategic priorities. I think we might have said this already today. I'm going to say it again, but there's several ways to design a strategic planning process. And it's really important when you think about designing your process, just kind of conducting almost a readiness assessment as part of your process development work. So when we were thinking about designing our process, we took a couple of things into consideration. The first is that we were really committed to ensuring that we embedded equity, belonging, and lean principles that Michaela shared. Secondly, we also wanted to honor feedback that we'd received from state human resources employees. And one piece of feedback that we received that Michaela referenced is that overall strategic planning was relatively new within state human resources. And so, employees were looking for some examples of, for example, what could a vision statement look like? Secondly, we also heard that some folks who had participated in past strategic planning experiences were asked to provide input, but then their input didn't show up in the final product. And so just ensuring that we were really clear about when we would co-create and when feedback would be asked and then follow through and be used. And then what would be more of a leader test model, which I'll talk about in a minute. So given these reasons that I just shared, we opted for the vision statement to be set by Michaela. And so Michaela set and shared the vision statement for State Human Resources. And the leader test model part of that is once the vision statement was set, it was shared with all employees for feedback and to really understand what's resonating, what's not, and then some adjustments were made based on that. Now, if your organization's further along in strategic planning, you may opt to have a full co-create model. If your organization is maybe newer to strategic planning, you may opt to do something similar to what we did. But ultimately, as depicted on this slide, we decided to co-create our mission, values, and strategic priorities, with success measures being developed by the State Human Resources leadership team using a similar test model that I mentioned for vision. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of our overall approach to developing the mission, values, and strategic priorities. It was relatively the same for all of these items. I think if I had to summarize it, I would say it was really a collaborative process that involved a series of working sessions and consultations with leaders and employees. And so the high-level process steps included, we hosted 3 to 4 virtual sessions to gather input for each of those items. So for mission, values, and strategic priorities. The meeting agenda for all of the sessions was the same. And as Michaela mentioned, we strive to send the agenda at least 3 days in advance with a list of the questions that we would discuss during the meetings. And the general agenda included kind of the standard welcome, introductions, as well as some guiding principles, and then followed with some general information about the topic of that meeting. So if it was mission, we would talk about what is the purpose of a mission statement, What are some examples? What are some characteristics of great mission statements? And then we would really structure the agenda in such a way that the bulk of our time together was about having conversation and gathering input that would be used to develop some draft statements. And then we would close with a synopsis of the meeting and the next steps. The meetings that we would have would usually take place over about a 2-week period, and then we would compile and share all employee feedback received via an all-staff email with an additional feedback period of 1 week. And the reason for that is we really wanted to ensure everyone had an opportunity to provide feedback. And I think it's also important to note that we used an electronic platform called Padlet to collect feedback anonymously. And essentially what it is an electronic whiteboard with sticky notes. And we found that hosting the multiple sessions and having a 1 week additional feedback period was really helpful for some folks. We had a few individuals who attended more than one session, so they could kind of attend one, listen to the questions, hear the conversation, and then attend a follow-up session to share their thoughts. After the 1 week feedback period ended, we reviewed all feedback and really identified some themes that were emerging. And then all of the feedback, including themes, was shared with the State Human Resources leadership team for awareness and reflection. And then we, following these meetings, used employee feedback to develop draft statements. And this is where there was some slight variation in the process between creating our mission, values, and strategic priorities. So for mission and values, we opted to use a survey to gather feedback about the draft statements. So for mission, as an example, we developed 3 draft statements using employee feedback and then shared those via a survey and asked folks to share, which statement resonates most with you and what is your top preferred statement. And we did a similar exercise with values, asking folks to select, I think it was their top 5 values out of about 10 selections. With strategic priorities, we took a slightly different approach. As Michaela mentioned previously, we had held the mission and values working sessions prior to the strategic priorities sessions. So we already had really great input about possible focus areas for state HR. So going into the strategic priorities sessions, we had some draft priority statements that we asked folks to provide feedback on and really wanted to understand, so this is what we've heard up to this point, did we understand correctly? Does this resonate? Does this not? And why? And then we also asked some open-ended questions to develop some additional possible statements. And then those statements were shared via email and discussed in an all-staff meeting with an opportunity for folks to provide feedback. And then I think just a key element of this process that I want to emphasize is the fact that we really strive to be clear about how employee feedback showed up in the final product. And really emphasizing, even if the words may not have been the exact same that were provided, just the sentiments and how they, were translated from employee feedback to be in the final statements. Next slide, please. And next slide. Thank you. So we decided early on it would be important to have shared guiding principles that would be used at all of our strategic planning discussions. These guiding principles were chosen because they align with State Human Resources vision and the culture the team continues to foster and build. So we had a total of 5 principles, starting with take calculated risks for the goal of a better workforce, speak your truth, lean into discomfort, understanding this is growth, having an outward mindset, and valuing differences, ideas, and views. And our process was to share these guiding principles and explain what they are at the beginning of every strategic plan session. And we also invited folks to suggest additions as well, so we could add to this list. Next slide, please. So we've talked a little bit about our approach to employee engagement and participation, but just to reiterate, we shared with employees from the onset that our ultimate goal with this process was to design it in a way that was accessible so that everybody could participate. And we would ask regularly if employees had feedback on what that looked like for them to please share that with us. And our process was agile. We also decided to hold all the sessions virtually, given feedback that we were probably going to have minimal participation for some of the in-person sessions that we were considering holding. And we did ultimately have the 3 to 4 virtual sessions on different dates and times in an effort to maximize participation and provide opportunities for folks to participate. And then we also continue to amplify that, you know, if none of the dates and times worked, or if people would prefer to share individual feedback, they could also engage, you know, with us via one-on-one meetings with me or Michaela, you know, participate in some of the surveys, send us an email, use Padlet to contribute anonymously, as well as reach out via some of our electronic platforms. Next slide, please. So this is just a data snapshot about the working sessions that we held to develop our mission, values, and priorities. Overall, these sessions were pretty well attended. We had approximately 40 to 45 employees attend at least one working session for mission, one working session for values, and one for strategic priorities. And at the time of these working sessions, there were approximately 70 employees within state HR. We also received over 150 content ideas for our mission, values, and priorities. And for the surveys that we used as part of our approach to develop the mission and values, we received a total of 67 responses for both surveys cumulatively, which works out to be a 47% response rate. And so that's something we want to continue building on in future strategic plan surveys. Next slide. So this is a timeline that describes our process for developing the 2023 through 2025 strategic plan. We really strive to design this for understanding that people have lives and are really busy in their day-to-day jobs. And we wanted to make it as easy as possible for employees to participate. We also understood that we started this process in November of 2022, immediately prior to the holiday season. So we knew, you know, people would be taking annual leave, and we were also going to be having meetings during the legislative session, which is a really busy time as well for folks. Even then, we discovered that we could have used more time for various parts of our strategic plan development cycle. The timeline that's on this slide is the final version after we made changes during the actual live process. But in general, you know, we started in November and had our vision statement, and then we worked on our mission statement from December through February. And then we worked on our values from January through March, and priorities from February through March. And then by March, we had a final vision statement, final mission statement, values, and strategic priorities. And then we took a slight pause and really focused on success measures for June through August. And the final plan, after completing a final review, will be posted this month. And so just as a recommendation, you know, we would encourage folks to build in extra time in your planning process as a buffer, understanding that, you know, sometimes to do things well, it takes more time than you originally anticipate. Next slide, please. All right, so in the spirit of continuous improvement, we evaluated what worked well and what could be improved. So in terms of what worked well, you know, I think leadership commitment and buy-in was significant in this process. The State Human Resources leadership team was actively engaged and supportive throughout this process. And I just want to say Michaela is an excellent sponsor and was really committed to this from the beginning all the way through to now, and that really showed in the final outcome. So thank you, Michaela. Also, collaboration and employee involvement. You know, we're really excited that we had so much employee participation and that this was truly a co-created strategic plan and that it was meaningful and is meaningful for folks. So we are really, you know, happy with that. And then we also asked employees for feedback. And what we've heard so far is that it was an interesting and valuable experience. And that even if you just provided one word, it felt like it helped contribute to the plan. That facilitation of the working sessions was good, and that it was really easy for folks to participate through many opportunities, and it was also easy to understand how to participate. And strategic planning can feel daunting, and it didn't in this case. So we're also really excited to hear that. Next slide, please. In terms of what can be improved, Michaela spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I think just building in more time into the planning process to really build strategic planning skill sets. So we know that just talking about each of these components alone of a strategic plan, so your vision, your mission, your values, we could spend hours on each of those topics alone. And so just recognizing that and building that into future strategic planning schedules. Also, I think the virtual sessions were excellent. They went really well. And we also want to explore, based on agenda content, is there an opportunity to have some in-person meetings based on the need? And then, as I mentioned, just allowing additional time for some aspects of strategic plan development. And I think now we're going to share the final outcomes of State Human Resources strategic planning work. So I will turn it over to Michaela.
Thanks, Anna. And like Anna mentioned, just because strategic planning was so new for folks, and what I heard a lot of is like, I need to see an example, or what do you mean by that? So even though it would be like, I think in an ideal state, we would have co-created the vision. I wanted to show folks of like, hey, here's where we're going, because this is the big overarching direction that we're going. So I kind of created that test model where I put a draft vision statement out there, which is, for us in state HR, again, the context of supporting state government, an engaged and energized workforce that is capable and empowered to provide culturally relevant and equitable services to the people of Washington. And this is a vision statement is often something that you might not achieve in your career time. I hope we do, but it is that big thing where we're not going to get to it in the next year. We're not going to change the whole 68,000 to 70,000 state employee workforce to where everybody feels like they're engaged and that they belong. But that's where we're heading. And so it helped people realize, okay, so if that's where we're going, what is the work that we need to do? So we tested that out first and foremost to make sure folks were good with it. We made a couple of changes, but for the most part, didn't change much. But then we kind of worked backwards and said, so let's talk about the work that we do in state HR. What is statutorily required that we're going to have to keep doing? But also, like, what's the work that we're doing right now? How does that contribute to that? How is there work that we're doing right now that doesn't contribute to that maybe we want to question if that's what we should be doing in our mission statement anymore, as well as where might there be some gaps? Are there things that we're not yet doing that we think we'll need to do in order to achieve this vision? And so we did co-create that vision statement, or our mission statement, which the team really put together and said, so if we want to achieve that vision, then we in state HR, we provide state employees with innovative policies, systems, and strategies to build an engaged and inclusive and diverse state workforce. So that is our goal. It's not just about delivering HR services, but it's about doing so in a way and specifically recognizing that it's our policies and centralized systems and strategies, and that we do it to build an engaged and inclusive and diverse state workforce, not a workforce that is just compliant, or not a workforce that are, kind of drones in a machine, but that it's an engaged, inclusive, and diverse workforce. Because that, once we have that out there, that becomes the thing that it can become the nexus for us to say, like, hey, we're now being asked to do this work. Does this help us? Is this a policy, system, or strategy? And does this help us build an engaged, inclusive, and diverse workforce? Or does it not? Or does it distract it from us? So that's why it was so important to work on that mission and vision statement. If we move on to the next slide, because I know we're almost out of time. I'm really proud of this because this was a full co-create. As Anna mentioned, there's a lot that, you can determine what works best for the team, for the time, for the context. But if there's anything that I would say every single time should be a co-create, it's the values. This is specifically state HR values. I did not participate that much. I participated as a team member where everybody got a chance to do this. And the reason why this is so important that everybody participates, I was at ESD during most of the pandemic. And when you get into a chance in ESD during the pandemic, everything was new, right? Like we didn't know what we were doing. We had a whole new law come in for different types of unemployment. And so we had to build policies and practices in the moment without anything telling us, here's how it was done before. And what I was so proud of at ESD is oftentimes when we had to make those decisions in the moment, the question we would ask ourselves is, well, what would it look like if we did this in accordance with our values? How might we design this in a way if we did this in accordance with our values? And that was so rooting for us to be able to say, every single time when we make a decision, we're going to use our values to help us do that. And so I'm so proud of State HR for doing this and look forward to how we can do this, how we make future decisions in accordance with our values that we co-created together. And then the last slide, just giving you, I know someone already asked in the questions of, like what are your 4 priorities? Through all of that work that Anna described, all of those processes, we got to kind of 4 key priorities. And it was that recognition that if we want to achieve that mission and vision, then and HR has been historically the problem, right? You look at our workforce and you look at that we do not represent the people that we serve. And the higher up you go in an organization, the more homogenous we will be. We have to acknowledge that HR as a system has contributed to that. So if we want to achieve that mission and vision, we have to acknowledge that we have to, infuse and enhance equity and abolish racism in all of our work. And we cannot keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So our number 1 priority was recognizing that we need to do things differently and we need to change how we do our work to achieve those more equitable outcomes. We also recognize that the only way we're going to be able to do that, since our people are what do our work, is that if we create a culture of belonging where every state HR employee has those tools, has the skills, has the bandwidth, because changing our work is different. So I know we're almost out of time. The next 2 are more like tactical, which is, we want to support One Washington. So we're doing readiness work to get to One Washington because that is a key priority that we have to do. And that it was also recognizing that we work in a political environment. And so we want to work with the legislature and the governor and trying to figure out how to be more proactive rather than having it do that to us. So those are our 4 priorities. I know we got some questions about specifics, so happy. I sent my email in there if you want to follow up, if you have questions on what our measures are, how we're planning to hold ourselves accountable to progress on that. And sorry, we ran out of time. I was so excited about all this work.
No, thank you so much for being here. This was excellent content and a lot of engagement, so that's fantastic to see.